Hey guys, ballparkkenan here, and today we'll be learning about advanced cannon shells. If you were looking for a guide on how to build advanced cannons, check out this video. We'll start with the ammo controller and customizer. This is where you design your shell. When connecting the ammo customizer to the ammo controller, make sure this large green indicator is facing toward the back of the ammo controller. The shell design is split up into 4 sections: the nose, middle, base, and propellant. The nose makes your shell aerodynamic and partly determines what your shell will be, like APHE or a heat shell. You can, of course, mix components, but we'll get into that a little later. The middle is the other half of determining what your shell will be. Here you'll be able to add fuses, fins, and an assortment of warhead bodies. The base, or bottom of your shell, allows you to add one rear piece. For example, a trace unit or a base bleeder. The base is optional and isn't necessary for your shell to work. The final section is the propellant. This is what makes the shell leave the barrel. The more propellant a shell has, the faster it'll go, but it will cause higher recoil and a longer cooldown time for the cannon. For regular cannons, gunpowder will be the only choice for propellant. For railguns, the railgun casing is the primary choice for propellant, but it can also be used in combination with gunpowder. This can be useful for railgun assisted cannons. Right here you'll notice the propellant density slider. This allows you to fine-tune how much propellant each gunpowder casing has. For the HE, heat, and HESH shells, I use enough gunpowder to get them up to around 300 meters a second. These types of shells don't use speed to kill, they use their explosive payload to. Don't drop the speed too low, however, as this leads to a shorter effective range and longer shell travel time before impact. For the APHE and hollow point shells, the higher the speed and mass, the better. This is what allows them to punch through blocks. Next, we'll cover the types of shells you can make. First up, we have the HE or high explosive shell. It explodes on the outside of a target and is unable to penetrate armor. This type of shell is entirely made up of HE shell pieces. It's effective at destroying lightly armored targets, and does little damage to heavily armored targets. Next we have APHE, or armor penetrating high explosive. It's made up of an APHE or composite head, at least one HE warhead body, and one penetration depth fuse. This shell penetrates a target and explodes at a set time or distance after penetrating. This shell will penetrate wood fairly easily, but because of its low AP value, it'll need multiple hits on a medium to heavily armored target to penetrate. It may not penetrate and will explode on the outside of the target, although this still does damage. It can over-penetrate, pass through the target, and cause very little damage. Heat or high explosive anti-tank. This shell fires a blast of molten metal into the target. It's made up of a shaped charge head and at least one HE warhead body. You'll notice with the HE warhead body, there's a special factor slider. This affects how much explosive power will be funneled into a squash head or the shaped charged head. So if the slider's at 0.8, 80% of the explosive force will be funneled into the shaped charge head or squash head. The rest will be generic explosive damage, like on the HE shell. On the shaped charge head, you'll notice a penetration factor slider. This affects the number of particulates your heat shell will have and how many meters of armor it'll penetrate. The lower the number, the higher the amount of heat particulates you'll have, but at the cost of penetration depth. The higher this value is, the higher the penetration depth will be, but at the cost of a reduced number of particulates. This shell is able to penetrate armor without needing to destroy the block it hits. This makes it effective at destroying soft components behind armor. Although it is weak against spaced armor, and countered by ERA armor. This is where the heat tandem warhead comes in. It's the same as a regular heat shell, but uses a secondary shaped charge to counter the ERA armor. Next, we have the explosive squash head or HESH shell. This type of shell creates a shockwave through the armor that creates spalling, which sends shrapnel into the interior of the target. This type of shell is made up of a squash head and at least one HE body. Its damage output is based on the last layer of armor the shockwave passes through, so the fragments from a wood beam will do less damage than fragments from a metal beam. It's countered by spaced armor and anti-spalled armor. Anti-spalled armor is a light armor lining inside a vehicle. Next, we have the hollow point shell. This shell flattens against the target and damages the block it hits as well as the structure laterally. It's made up of the hollow point head and one or more solid warhead bodies. This shell defeats wooden blocks fairly easily, but has a little bit more trouble with metal and heavy armor. With enough speed and mass, this shell can create large holes in lightly armored to medium armored targets. Next, we have the APHE or armor-piercing shell. These shells rely on high speed and are meant to punch holes in armor and hit vital components. This shell can be made up of just an APHE capped head, but I would recommend having at least one solid warhead body to increase its damage potential. This shell can pass through a target and do little damage if it doesn't hit anything vital. Next, we have the Sabot shells. These shells are similar to regular APHE shells, but have a higher armor penetrating value and reduce the damage of attached HE, EMP, flak, and frag bodies to 25%. It's made up of the Sabot head and at least one Sabot body. This shell, like the APHE shell, needs a direct hit on a vital component in order to do any real damage. To keep this video short, I haven't covered all the shells you can make, but I hope this gives you a general idea of how shells work in From the Depths. If you want to test out your own shells and cannons, or just want to look at some of the shells featured in this video, I'll be putting this shooting range up on the Steam Workshop. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Thanks for watching.